Now that we know what the different parts of the screen are called, we still have to ask the question, how do I use this crazy thing? And I think the best way to do that would be to dive into the center part of the screen, the worksheet area, and first talk about what are cells and cell references. You can see that my worksheet area is divided up into a grid. The grid has column headings, so if I click on a given column heading, you can see it highlights, and it's highlighting my whole column. I also on the side have row headings, and the row headings are numbers. Each rectangle in my grid is called a cell. Each cell then has a name. The name of the cell is the column heading and the row number. It's almost like a giant game of the board game Battleship, where each of these rectangles can be referenced using the column heading. Here I'm in B3, which is column B, and row 3, and the cell is B3. You'll notice that my name box also says B3. If I switch to C4, you can see that my name box updates with it. I know which of these cells I'm in because I have a box that goes around that cell, and when I click on a different cell, the box moves. The box is called the cell pointer, and the cell pointer is always on what would be considered the active cell. Whichever cell I click on, the box moves to it, and that cell is now active, and I can do something with that cell. So what can I put into a cell? There are multiple things that I can put into a cell. I've broken them into 3 categories: text, numbers, and formulas. We can also add dates into cells, but dates are actually just numbers that are formatted as dates. And we can also use functions inside our cells, but functions are almost always part of a formula, so I'm going to leave them as a subcategory of formula. Based on that, we have 3 things that we can put into a cell: text, numbers, or formulas. When I'm building a spreadsheet, I like to start by building the headers and then filling the data in. If I was going to do that, I would have to start by entering text into a cell. Let's build some simple headings. So if I want to put text into a cell, all I have to do is click on the cell or move the cell pointer to the cell where I want to type, and then I can just start typing. I'm going to click on B3. I'll type "Hello Excel" into the cell, and when I'm done typing, I can hit enter. Now the words that I've typed are stored in the cell where I was when I typed them. In this case, cell B3. If I click on B3, I can look at my formula bar and you can see that it says "Hello Excel." I can also see in my worksheet area that B3 contains "Hello Excel." What happens if I type in something that's much longer than my cell? I like to use Excel for work. Now notice that when I click on the cell, I can see I like to use Excel for work. Also, when I look at B4, I can see it, but the text is actually stretching out beyond the cell and going into cell C4 and cell D4. If I went into cell C4 and I started typing something, "Hello again," notice that it cuts off my text in B4, but the text is still there. If I come up to my formula bar, I can see that it has the full text, but when I look at my cell in my worksheet, all it says is "I like to," and then it's cut off because it doesn't fit. What this tells me is that each cell in my worksheet is actually like a window into what's actually contained into the box. If you want to think of the cell as like a cardboard box that can hold things, then the sheet view lets me look into that box. So here my window says "I like to," and it starts to say "use," but that's all it can see because that's how big the window is. But when I click on it, I can also look at my formula bar and see that the whole text is actually there, and it's just being cut off because it doesn't fit in the display. Good to know. And later we'll talk about how do I do things like I can change the width of a column so that all the text will display. I could change the size of the text itself so that more text could display. I could make the text wrap so that when it gets to the end of the cell, the rest of it is shown underneath. Lots of different ways to make all of that text appear on my worksheet if I need to. For now, I'm not too worried about it. I do want to talk about what if I need to change text that is in a cell. So I've got some text here and I just want to change hello again to say goodbye. I can click on the cell and I can just start typing over it. So in that case, I just clicked and started typing, and when I hit enter, I have now changed the cell. I can also double click on a cell. So here I clicked twice in quick succession. And now I'm in the cell and I can start typing. So in my case, I clicked and then went up to my formula bar and started typing. But let's also double type directly into the cell. You'll notice that I have this flashing cursor that I can work with. And now I can edit the content of the cell. And here I changed goodbye to good days will be here soon. And when I hit enter, that's what's in the cell. If I want to delete what's in a cell, I can select the cell by just going to it and then hitting my delete key. And now cell C4 is empty. And because cell C4 is empty, the content of B4, which stretches out beyond B4, will now be displayed in C4 until we put something else in there that will cover it up. More text. And now that's gone. But it's not gone because it's still in. If I click on B4, you can see it's still in B4. You should at this point be comfortable with how to put text into a cell. What about numbers? How do I get numbers into a cell? I'm going to click on another cell. Here I'm in B6, and I'm just going to start typing a number, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a nice number. And then I'll hit enter, and my number is now in the cell. There are a couple of differences. Let me come up here to B2, and I'm going to say ABC. Notice that when I put in text, it's going to push the text to the left side of the cell. But when I put numbers in, it's going to push the numbers to the right side of the cell. Excel is aware of what's in the cell, and it's saying, oh, this is a number, and you're probably going to use it as a number, so I'm going to treat it as a number, and we will push it to the right side of the cell. The reason for that is that it's just, I think humans like to keep numbers all lined up on the decimal point so that you can read down through the column and see, hey, the ones digit is always lining up with the ones digit. So you can see that that's why it's pushing it to the right. Now, obviously, if I put a decimal in here, things aren't going to line up anymore. And we will talk later about formatting so that we can format numbers so that they all line up correctly with the same number of decimal places. For now, I just have some numbers in some cells. What happens if I add a comma to my number? So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that still a number? Well, to me it is, and to Excel it is as well. So Excel says, hey, a comma is a valid part of a number, as is a $ or a euro symbol. So $1, 2, 3, 4. All of that is valid number, and Excel will treat it as a number. Though when I add a $ to the front, it gives it a different format. And again, we'll talk about that later, but notice the right side of my cell, it's not lining up as it was before. I can also do 50%, and it will treat that as a number. It thinks that 50% is a valid number. What happens when I type an address? 123 Center Street. Now, what's going on here? Well, it sees 1, 2, 3, and while I'm typing, Excel is saying, hey, that looks like a number, that looks like a number, that looks like a number. And then when I type the space, Excel says, well, there can't be a space inside my number, so that must be text, and it treats it as text. So 123 Center Street is now text left justified, meaning pushed over to the left. If I enter commas in the wrong spot, so 1, comma 2, comma 3, comma 4, and I hit enter, you can see it's left aligned, meaning that Excel looked at that and said, well, that's a number. So basically, how do I enter text? I just go to the cell and type it. How do I enter a number? I go to the cell and type it. And you should now be able to enter text and numbers into cells. The next thing we might want to enter is dates. And I can just type a date. By the way, how do I know it's a date? If you type something in a date format, Excel will look at that and say, oh, that must be a date. And it's going to accept it and keep it looking like a date. Notice under my Home tab, when I click on this cell that has a date in it, that under the number format, this box right here says date. So what it's saying is, I have you in here as a date. But dates are actually numbers, and I can show that by changing the format to a number or to general, and it changes my date to 44,917. And what the heck is that? The answer is that Excel counts from a certain date, which it calls the epoch, counts forward, and every day gets one day, and we are 44,917 days after the epoch on, what day did I put in there? 12/22, I think, or something like that, of 22. I can change it back to a date format, so here's short date, and yes, it's 12/22/2022. So great, it looks as a date. I wonder what day the epoch is. So what I'm going to do is change it back to a number. I'm going to change my number to the number 0. And I'm going to change 0 into a date format. So short date. And the answer is 10/1900. So day number 1, according to Microsoft Excel, is 1/1/1900. Which is interesting because if I want to have a date of 5/17/1836, what is it going to do? It actually treats that as text. It doesn't understand it as a date because it's before 1/1/1900. And this is useful information, especially if you're a history major or you're trying to build a timeline. This might not be the best tool because once you get under 1900, it's going to be a bit confused. What if I go in here and I change my date? So let's change that back to a number. And I'm going to try a negative number just to see what happens. So -12. And now I'm going to change it back to a date. And unfortunately, it just gets confused. It has no idea what you meant by that. So the bottom line is, if you want to store dates older than 1900, you're going to have to store them as text, and you won't be able to work with them as far as like counting how many days are between them or changing from month to month and doing some of the other functions that you can do with a date if the date is older than 1/1/1900. Wanted to also show you that you don't have to use slashes. So here I entered it with dashes and it took that as the date. There's also a setting, so if you're doing European style dates instead of US style, which is day, month, year instead of month, day, year, there are settings in Excel which will allow you to change how dates are displayed so that they are comfortable for how you use them.